Before we begin, there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. So I figured we'd follow up one video about a Titan with another one. Now, as far as Bankai go in Bleach, I've always felt that Kenpachi Zaraki's was pretty unique. Zaraki has the power of Bankai forcibly thrust upon him by Yachiru in a moment of need, and the uniqueness of this moment, of course, stems from the unusual relationship Zaraki has fostered with his Zanpakuto over the course of the story until this point in a totally natural and organic way. And to that end, I've always quite liked the way Zaraki achieved Bankai. Again, completely different to everyone else, even to those like Ichigo and Urahara, who themselves went against the grain in the way they unlocked the final stage of their Zanpakuto release. Although we regrettably only get to see Zaraki's unnamed Bankai for essentially a single chapter, it's enough for us to get some kind of an idea as to what it's all about. After all, I mean, it's Zaraki. It was never likely to be too complicated. Instead, it was bound to be an explosive spectacle of power, and that's pretty much exactly what we get. And so the Bankai he does have fits him extremely well, right down to the fact that it doesn't, at least yet, have a name of its own, reflecting some of Zaraki's longest-running internal turmoil. In fact, conflict and turmoil seem to be a bit of a running theme with this monstrous final form of his. So in this video, we're going to take a deeper look at Kenpachi Zaraki's demonic, bloodthirsty Bankai, something many of us had kind of always dreamed of, but never actually expected to see. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, when you're done with it, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well. And as always, I just want to give a massive shout out and say an enormous thank you to each and every one of you supporting me over there on Patreon. I really do appreciate all of you. Thank you all so very much. And one last piece of housekeeping as well. Over the last couple of weeks, I've released several videos over on my second channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, giving my thoughts on the summer showcases for both PlayStation and Xbox. So if you're interested in that at all, please go check those out and help support that channel as well. Again, it would be greatly appreciated. So, first and foremost, what does the Bankai actually do? The most obvious aspect of Zaraki's Bankai is the outward transformation, which I love for its simplicity. Zaraki becomes a literal demon, a rugged, battle-hungry, horned beast whose lips curl upwards to reveal vicious fangs in a terrible grin, blank, dead eyes betraying no emotion whatsoever. Upon activation of his Bankai, an unimaginable torrent of Reiatsu explodes with a violent blast, which, by the way, I'm surprised didn't sever the walkway Zaraki was on at the time, as that was something of an odd little subplot of sorts of this battle against Gerard, was that Hitsugaya in particular was desperately trying to stop chunks of Varvelt from falling down onto the Seirete, so I'm surprised this didn't have some kind of adverse effect as well, before Zaraki himself is revealed amidst the smoke and cracked earth. Honestly, the splintered, fractured earth like a shattered pane of glass beneath Zaraki upon the activation of his Bankai is a really cool visual, as you can kind of imagine it being the kind of leftovers of a gateway to hell from which he has emerged. I really wouldn't be surprised if by the time this is finally shown off in the anime, if those cracks beneath him are hot and lit up with some kind of red light or lava or something like that, as if to portray that same kind of idea. Anyway, hunched over like an animal, Zaraki looks inhuman. His skin has become a deep blood red. However, unlike the zombified captains from earlier in the arc, this isn't the same, almost artificial and dead appearance they had thanks to their reddish skin. Here, Zaraki's skin has become hellish and crimson. His hair seems to have grown even longer, wilder and more untamed than previously, while his shredded and torn Shihakusho almost seems to be leaking a fiery Reiatsu. The ground beneath him, as I mentioned, has completely shattered, and he's jammed the end of his Zanpakuto's hilt into the stone, as if to anchor himself amidst the torrent of force. Speaking of his Zanpakuto, this is where we can see the other most prominent change in his appearance. Nozarashi's blade, once almost comically enormous and adorned with an ornate decoration, has now been smashed in two. The weapon is of course smaller, splintered and broken with a jagged edge. And what does this mean? The change in his Zanpakuto is perhaps the most literal representation of what Zaraki's Bankai has done to him. When Zaraki first revealed his Shikai Nozarashi, it too was a mighty spectacle, seemingly almost impossibly massive and proud. Yet the decorative cap and tassel grounded it somewhat, reminding us that even with all the bravado and power, Zaraki was still a man, still a Shinigami, and at least maintained some facade of civility. With his Bankai active, that pretense has all but been tossed aside. This is Zaraki at his most base, his most brutal, his most violently instinctive. The shattered sword may also be a representation of the fact that Zaraki in his current state was unable to fully utilise his Bankai, but we'll get to that in a bit. There are other comparisons to be made here too. While the majority of Bankai expand outwards greatly, ballooning in size comparatively to Shikai, certain Bankai, perhaps arguably considered the apex of power, shrink down instead. Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu, Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi, and even Renji's true Bankai Sou Zabimaru. Other Bankai, when seemingly attaining their greatest form, also shed something of importance. Komamura's Dangai Joy is his Bankai stripped of its overbearing armour, while Hitsugaya's adult form, the matured, completed version of his Bankai, mostly removes the features of his Bankai entirely, only restoring them briefly when needed. Zaraki and his Bankai absolutely seem to fit this mould. Upon glancing up with his devilish grin, we see Zaraki's completely bone-white eyes and the horns now protruding from his skull. His facial features even look sharper and more angular than before, as if chiselled out of stone. But again, what does the Bankai actually do? Well, it lets Zaraki do what he does best. It lets him fight, unfettered, unshackled, unchained. Zaraki's Bankai doesn't waste any time with special abilities or the like, the usual pomp and circumstance of Bleach duels. It simply enhances all of his physical aspects immensely, skyrocketing Zaraki's power, his speed, his durability, all of it. The sheer amount of pure power Zaraki unlocks is almost impossible to wrap your head around, considering beforehand that he was already in his most powerful state possible with his Shikai active and his eye patch removed, and he was still getting destroyed by Gerard. The fact that he turns the tables on the Quincy so dramatically here is proof that he hasn't just reached new heights with his Bankai, he shattered them. The fact that after being so severely wounded, Zaraki is back on his feet, fighting as though he'd never been injured at all, is incredible. What I find interesting about the portrayal of Zaraki's Bankai is that he doesn't always use his sword to fight. He uses whatever he can to rip and pummel his opponent. He fights doggedly and like an animal, scrappy and resilient to tear his enemy apart with incalculable strength. For example, when Gerard tries to punch Zaraki, admittedly conveniently dropping Hoffnung before the battle, or else presumably Zaraki would have been seriously wounded by the damage he was going to be doing to the Holy Blade, Zaraki latches onto Gerard's knuckle with his bare teeth, successfully tanking and stopping the punch with just his mouth, before then ripping Gerard's entire arm off with a swift jerk of his head. Before Gerard can really get his bearings, Zaraki is upon him again, leaping towards him through the sky, clearing an enormous height, by the way, to reach Gerard's head, and this time using his sword, carves through both Gerard's shield and wrist in one strike. This is actually an intriguing moment in a vacuum, by the way. It was said before by Gerard that nothing could break his shield, and we see Zaraki's base Zanpakuto completely failing to put a scratch on said shield. Could Zaraki choosing to use his sword in this moment be a subconscious decision on his part, even with his mind in the state that it currently is, to strike with what he knows should actually work this time. Maybe he's not as mindless as first thought, or is he fighting purely with instinct, which would imply his animal instincts have told him that yes, this time your weapon will do the job. Zaraki then reaches out and uppercuts Gerard with his bare hand, punching him in the chin and pushing him directly off the side of Varvelt, sending him flying over the edge. And Gerard barely has time to reach out and grab Hoffnung before falling from the side, but Zaraki isn't done. As Gerard collects himself and spins around, sprouting massive angelic wings, and attempts to return to the battlefield, Zaraki, seemingly winding up for one final strike, twists and leaps into the air. And in a single arcing motion, Zaraki brings his sword down and splits Gerard in two from head to toe, killing the Sternritter. And as Zaraki kind of sails through the two halves of his enemy, blood raining down onto the white Quincy buildings around them, there's something else interesting to consider here. Zaraki's personality seems to be totally gone. He's not making any effort to prolong the fight at all, instead going almost straight for the guaranteed kill strike. That being said, he is fighting with a huge trademark grin on his face, so it seems possible then that he's transitioned from enjoying fighting to relishing in slaughter. Very fitting for his new demonic self. There is one other thing I should point out as well, as it's possibly my favourite element to all of this. Much earlier in the battle, when Zaraki first arrives, he slices off Gerard's forearm. Gerard, in a display of his Shrift's power, restores his arm in a golden flash of light. It happens near instantaneously, maybe taking a few seconds at best. And so that gives us a great perspective of just how fast Zaraki has actually become in this new form. Upon ripping off Gerard's arm with his teeth, Zaraki proceeds to overpower and ultimately kill the Sternritter before his arm even finishes regenerating. Now, it is his entire arm as opposed to just half of it like the first time, but I would be surprised if that made a huge difference to how fast it comes back. No, Zaraki is just that quick in Bankai, I think, to the point where even after he's flung off the side, Gerard's arm still hasn't fully finished reforming yet. It's a very clever way of showing and not telling, a cardinal thing to get right in writing, the reader that all of this is taking place in a matter of seconds at most. But that's not all Zaraki's Bankai can do. While he seems to have lost his ability to think and to reason, Zaraki's replaced those skills with finely tuned, well-honed animal-like instincts. Zaraki notices something is wrong and leaps away from Gerard's corpse an entire page before the Quincy actually rises again, and it's only then that both Hitsugaya and Byakuya catch on, even with Zaraki giving them what I can presume is some kind of a warning shriek, his only real way of communicating with his comrades in this form. Unfortunately, for both we as readers and Zaraki himself, Kubo decides enough is enough after only a single chapter. When Zaraki prepares to engage Gerard, now in Vollständig, now wielding Hoffnung again, his arm suddenly explodes with blood and ruptures in two. Yachiru notes that she released too much of his power at once and his body simply isn't ready for that yet. And to be fair to Zaraki, that makes total sense. He had no idea he was about to learn Bankai, which again I think is incredibly unique, and I'm pretty sure it's the only instance we've ever seen of that happening in Bleach. It's actually kind of ironic when you think about it. Essentially the same instance that defeated Gremmy now defeats Zaraki too. Someone's body not being strong enough, essentially, to contain Zaraki's own monstrous power. What I assume happened here is Yachiru saw that Gerard had activated his holy form and decided Zaraki needed more strength to combat it in that moment. I only wonder how Zaraki would have fared against Gerard if Yachiru hadn't intervened. Just how much stronger was the Sternritter here if at all. I mean, she clearly felt it was necessary to get involved, so I have to assume he was more powerful than Zaraki, but it's impossible to know for sure. So that's it for what Zaraki's Bankai can do. Honestly, we got a decent amount of information on it, considering it only existed for little more than a single chapter at most. Obviously, I'd have loved to have seen more of it, and I hope that maybe the anime extends its time in the spotlight. There really wasn't a dramatic need to get rid of it, I don't think, unless it was going to continue to vastly overpower Gerard. However, Zaraki is swiftly defeated, and the next time we see him, his Bankai has been disengaged. So, why does this Bankai fit Zaraki? What's the deal with it? It's a fascinating one to me because it's easily one of the most mysterious Bankai in the series. It comes and goes just like that, right at the end of the story, and is never so much as mentioned ever again. Like I said, it isn't even named, which feels right at home with Zaraki, a man who longed for a real name of his own, which he found in both Nozarashi itself and the well-earned title of Kenpachi. Of course, the Bankai fits on a basic level too. Zaraki has always been a physical strength powerhouse, and this not only amplifies that greatly, but puts it on display for all to see, hence Zaraki's newfound focus, I would argue, on using his mouth, on using his arms, his hands to fight, as well as his sword. That's not to say in his previous battles Zaraki only uses his sword, because it's just not true. In his fight against Noitra, for example, he grapples with the espada on numerous occasions, but here it feels more spotlighted than ever. As mentioned before, the shattered Zanpakuto toe is interesting. What does it mean? Is it as simple as a representation of the fact that Zaraki is only tapping into a part of his Bankai's true power? Or is it to show that he's lost all semblance of being a Shinigami and is now a monster? Speaking of him becoming a monster, the literal portrayal of how his enemies see him continuously throughout the series, I find it interesting that Kubo would later go on to reveal on Club Outside that Yachiru wasn't the Zanpakuto spirit of Nozarashi per se, but the spirit of its Bankai. How does Yachiru relate to this form at all? Does she need to relate to it? I'm not entirely sure. Even Tensa Zangetsu, before being revealed to be a young Yuha Bark, at least represented the blade Ichigo held to some degree. Then there's also Katen, who appears during Kyoraku's Bankai. Their tricksy back-and-forth relationship is a reflection of the devious and dark nature, not just of Kyoraku's Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju, but his Zanpakuto in general. Yachiru definitely doesn't see Zaraki as a murderous demonic beast, I wouldn't have thought anyway, nor is she herself really like that at all, and yet a Zanpakuto is a reflection of a Shinigami's own soul. Maybe this really is just Zaraki's love of battle coming to the forefront, spilling over, but then if that were the case, it's interesting that he seems to try and go for the kill almost immediately. That being said, I do like Yachiru being able to simply bestow Bankai upon him at her choosing. I mean, it makes total sense. Zaraki has, ironically, one of the strongest and firmest bonds with his Zanpakuto of them all. He just didn't know it. He didn't need to materialize her or make her submit. She knows him and his heart already, and has done for years. She knows he loves to fight, that he desires to fight, and so when she saw him crumpled on the ground against an opponent who overwhelmed him, she decided to step in and lend him the strength he needed to get back on his feet. Now it's presumably up to him to continue that journey and become stronger with his Bankai in the years to come. And so to segue from that into our final point, how can we expect Zaraki's Bankai to evolve in the future? As he trains with it, as he improves with it, will Nozarashi's blade be restored over time? I feel like that is a cool concept to potentially explore. Perhaps Zaraki claws back some of his mind more and more as he grows more accustomed to his Bankai, and in doing so it begins to return Nozarashi to its original state, a reflection of how Zaraki's mind is slowly being reforged. Though I almost can't imagine him talking coherently in that form, considering it does look so malevolent and animalistic. Of course, he'll gain access to more and more raw power that his body this time can actually handle. But that leads me to another question. Does he actually need to train with his Bankai at all, or does he just need to train his physical body? If Yachiru is capable of increasing his strength basically whenever she feels like it, as if she's just twisting a dial, then perhaps it's simply up to Zaraki to ensure he's capable of withstanding that. Like I said, almost as though Yachiru is constantly tweaking with some kind of pressure valve during battle, and Zaraki needs to get to the point where he's capable of withstanding her meddling. But that's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. That's a deep dive look at Zaraki's Bankai, the unnamed Bankai, the monstrously powerful, hellish, devilish Bankai, where Zaraki quite literally becomes a demon. Honestly, if there ever is a Hell arc, I sincerely hope we see this form again, as it's going to fit right in. But what do you think of Zaraki's Bankai? Let me know in the comments below. How powerful do you think it is? Do you think Zaraki needs to train with it in the future? Or does he just need to continue to hone his physical body in order to sustain that burden? How do you expect Zaraki's Bankai to evolve should we get a chance to see it again in the future? And did you enjoy how the Bankai was portrayed in the slim amount of screen time that it actually got? Like I said, I really hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Leave a like if you did, hit subscribe if you haven't done already, and until next time, I'll catch you later. Make sure to go check out those other videos over on Mr. Tomo Talks Games as well, and I'll see you then.